Nokko has arrived. This playful frame partners well with Urali in terms of attitude, and no doubt would get along well with Nezha too. But storylines, fashion and fickle lore are subjects for other channels. Let's see what this frame actually does, and why I'm no fan of his third ability. I'm TheKengineer, let's solve a practical problem. Nokko is only available after the new war quest, unless purchased for Platinum. As a late farm frame then, we can expect some real power right out of the box. Nokko does not disappoint. Its first and second ability deploy mushrooms which pulse every 3 seconds. The first ability mushroom, Stinkbrain, will inflict viral damage and status on enemies in range and line of sight with every pulse. Without other interaction, each Stinkbrain will maintain 2 viral procs per target. Affected enemies will also be put to sleep if they're vulnerable to crowd control. This makes them easier to kill and easier to avoid. Nokko can deploy a maximum of 4 of these simultaneously. The second ability mushroom, Brightbonnet, provides a strength buff and flat energy restore to Nokko and allies within range but with no line of sight required. The strength buff lasts for a short duration after the pulse, giving your team some flexibility in using it. The energy restoration works with toggled abilities like Mace's Peacemakers, as it's a flat restoration, not an energy over time effect. To avoid infinite stacking, the strength buff does not affect Brightbonnet itself. This includes both your own casts and casts by any other Nokkos in the squad. Likewise, it's also limited to a max base buff of 150% strength or 300% when doubled with the fourth ability, even if you're stacking the buff with Nidus. Nokko or others who subsume this ability can only deploy 2 Brightbonnets at once. Both mushrooms pulse every 3 seconds, both last for a respectable 25 seconds at base, with most of their stats scaled by range, strength and duration as you'd expect. The pulse frequency is not affected by stats. All mushrooms also act as Nokko's passive. Should Nokko be downed while any mushroom of his is active, Nokko reverts to Sproddling and has 10 seconds to touch a mushroom. Doing so destroys all mushrooms to revive Nokko instantly. Each mushroom can also be used as a trampoline. Yes, you heard me right, a trampoline. Nokko, Sproddling form Nokko, Nokko's fourth ability, and any allies who land on a mushroom or jump while colliding with a mushroom will have significantly increased jump height as they're launched upwards. This can repeat indefinitely if you stay directly over a mushroom. Anything bouncing on a mushroom this way will trigger it to activate its pulse immediately, bypassing the normal delay. You can quite literally squeeze more out of the mushrooms. Use this to enhance the energy gain or spread viral more quickly. If Nokko's fourth bounces on a mushroom this way, it also permanently doubles the pulse rate of both types of mushroom and permanently doubles the strength bonus of Brightbonnets it hits. With those 2 mushrooms providing team buffs and debuffing enemies, you can then unleash the more active power of Nokko. Sporespring, his fourth ability, is where all of his damage comes from. This thing is stacked with multipliers. When you throw out a Sporespring, you release a bouncing projectile that delivers AoE damage wherever it bounces. This damage has no fall off over distance, giving full effect on all enemies caught in the burst and line of sight. The damage starts at 2500, modified by strength. It also has a critical chance, starting at 75%, with a critical damage of 2 times. With each bounce, the damage increases by 50% multiplicatively, and the critical chance increases by a flat 25 points. The projectile can land up to 10 times, meaning 9 bounces, so 9 buffs to the damage and critical chance. I'll put the full skinning on screen here, but crucially, you hit 100% critical chance after 1 bounce, 200% after 5 bounces, and 300% after 9 bounces, meaning the final hit is guaranteed to be a red crit. The base damage climbs from 2500 on the first bounce to a powerful 96,000 on the final bounce. Multiplying the guaranteed red crit, and it's now 384,000 damage. Multiplying 2 viral procs on a target, and it's now 865,000 damage. Multiplying some good strength, say 300%, and now it's 2.6 million damage. Each of those bounces has guaranteed toxin procs to apply even more damage over time to survivors. This makes it compatible with Archon continuity to apply corrosive procs, helping to defeat enemy armor. The Sporespring is only an ability projectile, not a weapon attack, so it cannot benefit from many buffs. Eclipse, Nourish, Overdriver and Tenacious Bond, for example, all have no effect on the damage type, scaling, or on the critical damage. Strength will not scale anything other than the base damage, meaning the critical scaling and damage modifier per bounce remain the same regardless of modding. Two things that do buff it, however, are Raw for more ability damage and more status damage, as well as Arcane Crepuscular for more strength and critical damage. Finding a way to subsume or qualify for these will be an immense power increase. More on that in the builds. Most limiting of all though is the range. If you have a low range stat, the Sporespring simply can't see where it's going, let alone hit many targets. At all times, it wants to go in the most fun direction, such as bouncing on trampoline mushrooms or dunking on Xmas units. With a low range, it might only see a barren area with nothing to draw its attention, sending it bouncing lazily nowhere useful. Expand your range stat, and it sees a target-rich environment full of potential. Range is key to Sporespring and to Nokko as a whole. Once you have enough range, you can use sensibly placed mushrooms to softly guide the Sporespring. It can only jump to targets it can see in line of sight, so creating a small pathway of mushrooms can encourage it to cover useful areas for hurting enemies. Gently suggest to your Sporespring which direction the enemies are in, and hope that it eliminates that direction. Unlike many other scaling abilities, Sporespring does not rely on a complicated setup to get the full power. If the enemy count drops down for a moment, or you don't have an ideal status primer, it doesn't matter. Each bounce will still scale the damage up regardless. If the Sporespring bounces 9 times on nothing but mushrooms, but the 10th bounce slams into a pack of Xmas units, then the whole pack is getting that red crit 38.4 times damage boosted Toxin Slam. The final limit on Sporespring is that only 3 may be active at a time. As their lifespan is limited by bounces, not duration, the wider the area and more split their bounce targets, the longer the spores will live. If you recast too soon, you will remove an existing spore and lose out on that top end damage and crit. Pace yourself, read the room you're infesting, and wait for the beautiful red numbers before deploying your next volley. This gives you Nokko's core rotation. Brightbonnets first to set up your energy generation, your strength buff, and to guide Sporesprings. Stinkbrains to again guide Sporesprings, soften enemies, and put them to sleep. Lastly, Sporespring to playfully bounce around and scale to group-crushing damage. Your focus is on placing the mushrooms, keeping spores in rotation, and scooping up the loot you've earned. So then, what is Reroot, the third ability, for? Functionally, it is a mushroom-flavoured Cloudwalker from Wukong. You become untargetable, you become unable to interact other than to move or end the ability early, you gain healing over time, you change form, and you can bypass all detection from both enemy vision and from security like in spy vaults. It is genuinely Cloudwalker, but mostly worse. Reroot costs twice as much energy to cast, though does last 5 times as long at base. Neither Wukong nor Nokko should have energy issues, so this is a non-issue. Nokko has restricted vertical movement as a Sprodling because you trade out your bullet jumps for a hoppy little triple jump. You also don't get enhanced movement speed by default like Wukong gets. Instead, you need to pick up the nearby spawning spore orbs to grant you extra healing and movement speed for a very brief time. I must stress the nearby spawning of these orbs. If you're trying to move at speed in the first place, the distance they spawn from you is not at all easy to plan around. When I tried going quickly, I found it better to just spam dodge and jump towards my route, accepting any spores that appeared in my path. Then to top it off, the healing exists. Nokko is not a frame who should need an entire ability to support his health. He's got no other damage reduction ability, no massive amounts of armor, no means of hit point tanking at all really. Wukong does, with Defy granting up to 1500 armor, so it makes sense for him to have a survival tool in health regen. For Nokko, if you're somehow squeezing in a health tank onto him, Sprodling form isn't going to be the thing saving your mycelium. Some may see this as an oh crap button, to save yourself should things get tight. Except you can use shield gating, overguard gating, rolling guard, guardian, operator form, and Nokko's passive to handle oh crap moments. Most of those don't stop you doing other things too. A whole ability isn't needed at this point. Now, to be fair and charitable, I have done my best to consider forced use cases. They are as follows. Scenario 1, you're running Nokko, relying on his 1-2-4 combo for damage, and have literally nothing to do while waiting for the 3 Sporesprings to bounce around a large area. You drop into Sprodling form to ensure you don't get attacked for some seconds. If you're doing this, I would far more recommend using a Shade Sentinel or Huras Kubro companions to provide indefinite invisibility for you. So long as you don't use a weapon or Parazon, you can keep casting from the safety of non-detection without popping in and out of an awkward sneaky mushroom form. It's an obvious choice to me. Be invisible and still able to cast, or be undetectable and unable to cast. Scenario 2, you're sneaking through a mission, which, sure, you can sneak as a mushroom, or just use Shade or Huras again, or basically any other stealth Warframe if the entire goal is sneaking. About the only case I can consider is if you need to travel safely to an objective while doing nothing along the route. This means you're not getting and maintaining stacks on any weapons, your build is not in a position to swap in the aforementioned companions, and you're also so threatened as to be unable to rely on the various other defensive utilities available to everyone. Somehow, with all of these limits, you are still able to cast Reroot to victory. At a stretch, the last use case is to go, "Oh, look at the little mushroom boy go." Fair enough, honestly, if that's your focus, but that form lacks function as far as I'm concerned. To me, this is the helmet slot. So let's look at builds around these concepts. The most powerful concept is Nokko in a static area and utilizing invisibility. This gives us the freedom to add in Arcane Crepuscular for the sheer critical damage and strength bonuses. On critical damage alone, it takes you from a 2 times to 5 times modifier. On yellow crits, this is a 2.5 times damage multiplier over normal, rising to 3.25 times on red crit. There's not many arcanes that can give that much power to anything in a single passive stat. There are 2 ways to obtain the required invisibility: abilities or companions. The companion way to achieve that is with Shade or Huras, as I mentioned earlier, giving you a full caster focus. By using a companion for invisibility, you leave the 3 open to be raw for yet another damage bonus. Shade is slightly worse than Huras based on its options. Shade lets you use Guardian, Sacrifice and Verglass. Huras on the other hand has the Retriever mods and the Mecha set if you so desire. Shade will not attack while invisible, and Huras will only attack rarely if it wasn't in combat ongoing invisible. To get around this, you can use Duplex Bond very easily to have a squad of companions applying weapons fire. This comes at the cost of slowing down enemy approach into your kill zones. If you're going with companion invisibility, you can go straight onto the mods. By stacking a very high range, decent duration, and as much strength as you can fit in what's left, you can end up on a build like this. At first glance, it may not look like it has a lot of strength, but that's just the arsenal number. Arcane Crepuscular grants 30% strength, and Molt Augmented, fully stacked, is 60%, bringing us to 229% strength as standard. This then buffs Brightbonnet to the point of giving us 68.7% strength at base, doubled to 137.4% when struck by Sporespring. With that 137.4% bonus, the 229% general strength, and Precision Intensify for 90% more strength on Sporespring, that cheeky damage ability launches with an eye-watering 456.4% strength in total. On striking an enemy with just 2 viral procs on them from Stinkbrain, the 10th bounce will be dealing 12.8 million damage if you're invisible, along with a guaranteed toxin and corrosive proc, if they survived. Adding the optional Subsumed Roar, the damage climbs again due to its 109.9% faction buff. That final bounce is now 26.9 million toxin damage on hit, with a toxin proc dealing 28.3 million damage per tick. You may see different numbers due to damage resistance and vulnerabilities, plus a slight variation from damage quantization. Only Google that if you really like math and computer science. All the while, your pair of Brightbonnet mushrooms, enhanced with Sporespring for double pulse rate, are emitting a very shiny 34.35 energy per pulse for 45.8 energy per second regen. That's before accounting for extra activations from anything bouncing on the mushrooms. As long as you get close to an enemy every 3 seconds to keep the invisibility of Shade or Huras up, you're an undetectable, acrobatic, soporific, restorative, damage-dealing menace. If you don't want to use those companions, there are other ways to achieve invisibility. You may consider foregoing Roar for Evade for indefinite invisibility on the go, so long as you score the weak point kills. Or use Quiver for the cloak bubble in a constrained space, unless you attach it to a companion. Alternatively still, Arcane Trickery has a chance to make you invisible for a good duration on performing finisher kills. Enemies put to sleep and viral proc by Stinkbrain mushrooms are particularly vulnerable to finisher kills. As a last resort, you can also use Reroot. While in Sprodling form, despite the UI currently not showing the buff, you are considered invisible and eligible for the buffs from Crepuscular. This has two serious drawbacks which make it a last resort. Firstly, you aren't casting or doing anything useful while in Sprodling form, meaning all your casting must happen while you're visible and not getting the strength buff. Secondly, your Sporesprings don't last all that long, meaning you'll be constantly diving in and out of Sprodling form on top of the rest of your casting. This will be a lot of time where you're visible, potentially vulnerable, and not buffing active Sporesprings. Considering you could just be not doing all that, it's not a great choice. Lacking any invisibility, and if you don't want to constantly be in Sprodling form, you'll need to replace Arcane Crepuscular. It's dealer's choice at that point, as most arcanes become more about what you're doing instead of being an invisible caster. But quite frankly, you're losing out a lot of power by dropping the invisibility aspect, only to make yourself very vulnerable too. If you're lacking portions of this setup, Shade is very easy to acquire for general survival, even if you lack Crepuscular, and Cuirass is not much more work. Otherwise, focus on high range, enough duration to keep the mushroom uptime comfortable, and enough strength that you're clearing the missions you're on. Strength below 400% is still going to get a lot of work done, no worries, but still try to keep it decently above 100%. This setup's biggest drawbacks are the low efficiency, encouraging you to remain around Brightbonnets, and a lack of defense against control immune targets should they find you. The Violence Acolyte dies easy enough to Sporesprings at least, but this build is not best suited for a mobile mission or for boss killing. For something more mobile, we want something efficient. Efficiency means we don't have to wait for energy to pile in, and are even able to get a net gain from Brightbonnets the moment they are cast. To do so, we sacrifice range and duration, switching up like this. Arcanes here are more about your preferred playstyle. If you're using Shade or Cuirass still, Crepuscular remains amazing. Beyond that, are you in a mobile yet long-running mission like Disruption? Consider Molt Augmented. Are you doing a short mission like Exterminate? Switch to immediate benefits like Arcane Consequence for parkour, or Arcane's Trickery and Ultimatum to use sleeping enemies for finisher kill triggers. The general play remains the same, casting mushrooms strategically to enhance your Sporespring application, just with the cheapest energy economy, meaning each cast is very disposable. Each cast of Brightbonnet costs just 12.5 energy, yet regenerates 27 energy with Precision Intensify, or 36 energy with an activated Archon Intensify. Virtually a free energy orb just for deploying it. Jump on the mushroom to double the effect as you leap forwards. Stinkbrains also come down to a hilariously cheap 6.25 energy. Sure, they don't last long, but you'll have moved into the next room even sooner. Finally, if you're somehow dead set on using Nokko as a spy frame, then here's a Shroomwalker setup. I'm not going to call it good, as that had set unreasonable expectations compared to better spy frames like Wukong. It is, however, functional and somewhat unique. The build is all the duration buffs I can stack without disastrously compromising the other three abilities, with Arcane Steadfast to draw out the energy economy if you really start spamming. If it never triggers, you still spawn in with enough energy to cast Reroot 10 times over, with a total duration of over 4 minutes. With Brightbonnet, Steadfast and normal energy pickups, you should surely have enough sustain here. The movement buffs of Rush, Speed Drift and Firewalker are there to enhance Nokko's own movement outside of Sprodling form to give you maximum navigation potential. I'm not recommending this. I'm including it because it does technically work. I know some people want to be a silly sneaky mushroom as a genre mismatched solution to hacking high-tech corpus vaults, and I'm not going to gatekeep that. Used for non-stealth purposes, the build still has minute-long mushrooms, a potential to self-buff for 60% strength, and up to 615,000 damage on the final bounce of Sporespring just as is. In total then, we have a damage camper under Shroud of Invisibility, an efficient fungal menace with room for personal flavour, and an enduring Sprodling putting the silly in mycelium as you rob the vaults. In terms of Archon Shards, the choices are a little curious and depend more on how far you intend to go. The obvious starting points of strength and duration don't do as much as you might hope on Nokko. Strength shards will be drowned out on an already strong build, and is skipped intentionally as a stat on more enduring ones. Duration, while able to extend the lifespan of all the mushrooms, is only really reducing the frequency of some of your casting. It won't make Sporesprings last any longer, usually the biggest demand on cast frequency. On Amber Shards, only casting speed is of any value to make Nokko snappier with gameplay. I've intentionally left them out in all video clips to again set fair expectations of his flow, so if you do use these, it will be snappier. Azure Shards offer very little of importance to him, Violet Shards nearly nothing, and Topaz Shards actually nothing. Emerald Shards fit Nokko's theme, though be mindful of how much you're actually getting. Enhancing Toxin status effect damage will be a reliable boost, but must be considered with how often that extra damage is needed. Consider that going from the 8th to 10th Sporespring bounce, climbing from orange to red crit, increases the hit damage by about 200%. 5 Emerald Shards would be a further 150% bonus specifically to the status damage. Strong, but you may struggle in finding an opponent who lives long enough for it to matter. The Health Recovery Shard is nearly useless to Nokko. Extra ability damage on already corroded enemies competes with the Toxin Proc Shard, unsuccessfully in my opinion. Lastly, extra stacks of corrosive are really not needed. So unless you've got a specific niche use in mind, I recommend some cast speed shards, and then either strength, duration or toxin proc damage, whichever you vibe with honestly. All in all then, this is everything you could need with our curiously playful Sporeframe. If you find these guides helpful, consider supporting me on Patreon from just a couple quid a month. The link for that is down below. And as always, beat new war, spread the spores, and fight well, Tenno.